Hi there, and welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And today we're going to be discussing, let's see, it's a long sentence. Good marketing gets you readers, but good writing keeps them. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup. And we'll start with you, Dave, if you're ready.
Yes. Been a less than efficient week for me this week, as my computer suffered from the dodgy NVIDIA drivers problem, which is that there is a very small, like less than 1% possibility the latest generation of NVIDIA drivers will cause an intermittent crash. So my computer started going a little bit wonky when I was watching videos. So I tried rolling the driver back, but because the problem's in a couple of series, it rolling back once didn't help. So I lost a while to fixing that, but I've still managed to get an episode of Seven Stones written, polished, and published. And everything apart from the cover of my pseudonymous project is ready. And now I've got a computer that will stay awake while actually working on high intensity images. I can finish off deciding on a cover and get that done. So
cool.
Not great, not horrible.
Yeah, but I think the fact that you got so much done despite the computer troubles speaks well. A week ago, my iTunes on my computer said, this graphics card is so old that you need to use a different version of iTunes specially made for older graphics cards. So maybe I need to upgrade sometime soon. I don't know. It's about 5 or 6 years old now, I think, my computer.
Yeah, it depends what you're doing. I don't tend to upgrade graphics cards that often. If you're building a gaming machine and you want the latest games, having a shiny bleeding edge graphics card can be great. But if you're perfectly happy playing games that were released 5 years ago, then I don't really see the need to upgrade graphics cards until they break.
No, I mean, I've gotten to the stage. I don't mind playing things on medium to low settings, but it's gotten to the stage where I think it's kind of low settings. Like, in order to play any games, I'm going to have to upgrade pretty soon. I bought Space Engineers just this week because I thought Alex would be interested because it's space, and it chugs. Like, it barely runs at all. So I think that was kind of a waste of $5 or whatever it was. It's only an indie game, though. Anyway, it's not the gaming podcast. So this week I wrote 14,000 words of sorcery, which has gotten it near to the end. I've only got a little bit of ending action and then an epilogue to write, so that's not too much. And I read half of prologue, which it's always difficult to compliment because I wrote the first draft, but Dave has done an exceptional job on the second draft. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I left about 1 word in 4 in there, so it's
a tiny bit of it is my influence, but the rest is Dave. So that was what I achieved, and then there was 2 things I heard during the week, or read, which were really interesting. The first was on the Sell More Books show. They were talking about this new study they ran, where they were trying to find out how much influence a book cover has on expectations. So they ran an experiment where they gave a book to a bunch of readers with a non-fiction looking cover, and the book was a thriller, and then did the reverse with a thriller looking cover and the book was non-fiction. And 75% of the readers gave up in a few chapters time, like just dropped it. And the same target audience were interested in the book when it had an appropriate cover. So their expectations were, when it looked like it was a spy thriller and they read it and it was a nonfiction book that they would have been interested in, they were like, well, forget this. This isn't what I was expecting, and vice versa. So that was interesting, because that's something we've mentioned before in the podcast, that your book cover has to convey the genre. That's its first job. It has to be a great book cover that draws people in, but first and foremost, it has to say, this is a X book.
Yeah, thinking about it, it is something I notice. I mean, I read voraciously, so it's not something that on its own would put me off to the point where I stopped reading. But there have been books where I've seen that sort of there's a dragon on the cover and there are no dragons in the book, and I've got to the end of the book still waiting for the dragon to appear, and I thought, well, why was there a dragon on the cover? And there's no dragons in this book. So yeah, I could see how people who don't have the same read to the end approach that I have would give up.
Like if The Martian had had two spaceships fighting in space, it would have been the correct overall genre of science fiction.
Yeah.
But if you'd read that, you would have gone, this is nothing to do with spaceships fighting in space. It would have put off the people who would be interested in reading it. And then when the people who are looking for space battles read it, they would be put off as well.
Yeah, which does also raise a corollary to picking the cover for your genre, that you should push back against people who say, well, all space opera stories have to have this on the front. If the most famous trope of your genre's cover isn't anywhere in your book, then maybe that means you shouldn't put it on there to tell readers what genre it is. You should go, well, I'm going to have a cover that doesn't fit the archetypal one for my genre, and have it fit the story. Even though usually picking a cover to represent your story isn't the optimal approach.
Well, you'd need to find, so if you were writing YA, you would need to find a kind of a YA kind of fantasy thing. You would need to find something that looked moody, but if you didn't have vampires, maybe you had like, I don't know, ghosts in it. Then you would put a moody ghost kind of image that looked similar to the vampire looking covers, but didn't have a vampire.
That is interesting, because thinking about it, and a lot of YA, paranormal romance, that sort of thing, has the character on the front with those jagged, angular, tribal style tattoos. And depending on whether it's a sort of high spec, big publisher book or a self-published, did it all myself book, they have a more or less photoshopped on look to them. But that seems to be a thing that's there to show it's an edgy thing rather than a more romantic thing. But thinking about it, none of them I've read have ever talked about people having those angular tattoos all over their body. So there do seem to be some things that are so expected that you just blank out that it's there.
I mean, I mentioned a few weeks ago that I read that Shifter book, which barely had anyone changing into a wolf or anything. Like it happened twice in the book, and it was only for a second. And I said that to my wife, who's into kind of shifters and vampires and all that kind of stuff. She said, oh, I would have thrown that book across the room. So like there is a lot of expectations in what people read. If they, the cover for that book has a young woman and a giant wolf, which, you know, is conveying that there's werewolves and there isn't. That would be, but then she's massively successful. So what do I know? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the power of human expectation is a really odd thing. There have been studies done with wine that if you take white wine and add red food coloring to it, if you give it to people, they'll assume it's red.
Mm.
And they'll talk about complex tannins and heaviness. If you give them the same wine without the food coloring in, they'll taste it. Even if they taste it right afterwards, they'll talk about the one without the food coloring having lightness and sweetness. And no one, despite the fact the only difference is a tasteless color additive, will it's the same wine.
Mm.
So the expectation, because it's red or white, that it's going to taste like a red or a white is so powerful that it makes sense that the cover is going to strongly influence how people experience the book.
Hmm. The other thing I saw this week was so a bunch of independent authors on Facebook worked out how the Amazon sales rankings actually work. And it's way simpler than anyone thought. So the only things that influence your book's position are what was your book's position today? How many books did it sell today? And how many books did it sell yesterday? That determines, so to give an example, if I take a copy of this for a second. So say that you're selling 25 books a day. Then it's taking your sales today plus half of your points yesterday. So I've just made one sale equal 1 point, just to simplify it. So you see that it's slowly climbing up until it gets to about 50 points, and then it just stops. So then that explains why, if you say, you see here, if you had a BookBub ad or a large mailing list ad, and you sold 2,030 books, and then the next day you had, the kind of whoever's reading the email the second day kind of thing, that you would drop down to your original position of 50 within however many days that is, 10 days maybe. Which is why people report, I had this amazing surge and then it just all disappeared within days. You can see that already within 4 or 5 days, it's dropped to position 100 points, where it was at 2,000 points. So it would have been near the top of the store, and then it drops to a tiny fraction of that. Which is why what this says to me is that you need to work out what your goal is for promotions. So if your goal, say you work out that you need to sell X number of books in order to be number one in a subgenre, and that means that using this calculation, you need to have so many points. So in their example, they were saying if you get 50 sales on a day, and then 25 sales on the next day, you'll maintain a position of 50. But as you saw, even if you just got 25 and stayed at 25, you're going to get to position 50 pretty quickly anyway. Within 5 days, you're at position 50 anyway, without the promotion. So anyway, so all the thing is saying is that if you have a goal, which is to hit a number one spot, for instance, because you want the number one flag on Amazon or something like that, then it's reasonable to run promotions. But feeding into our topic for the day, it's the book's natural position is where it's going to end up eventually anyway, no matter how much promotion you do, because you're going to run out of potential places where you can promote. So if your book is going to sell 25 copies a day, which is pretty good actually for at least where we are at the moment, but if it's going to sell 25 copies a day, it's going to end up selling 25 copies a day within a week or two anyway of whatever promotion you're running. There's never going to be a promotion that gets you to a position and stays there forever. The only thing that it adds is, as I say, if you're hitting the top of a chart in a subgenre, then you'll have added visibility for a while. and you'll get that little flag if you hit number one for a while. Which, yeah, as I say, that's kind of an interesting take on it. It gives you then a goal, which is there is no point, for instance, in running a promotion once every week. That would be completely pointless. You would get some position, but you wouldn't hit the top number one in your subgenre, and then you drop again, and then you go back up to position 98, and then you drop again. It would never do anything for you, other than obviously you get more sales. I mean, if your promotion costs less than the sales you're getting in, obviously that's worth it. But otherwise, it's only visibility you're gaining. And the other thing they said was that the search results are not related to sales at all. So the best-selling title for a phrase does not rank number one for a search. But they said it's much more complex and they haven't worked it quite out yet. But they said the search has nothing to do with sales. It's to do with relevance, and how Amazon works out relevance is a mystery at the moment.
Right. From what I can see, it's based on the searcher's history as well. So if you bought a lot of paranormal romance books, then if you search for something in the fiction store, even if you don't have any paranormal romance related keywords in your search string, paranormal romance books that meet your search string will appear higher because Amazon knows that that's the kind of book you like. So their algorithm seems to be going, when this person searches, they're going to want things that match their criteria, but they're also going to want things that they like. So it prioritizes the intersection of things it knows you like with things you're searching for, which is usually good, but can mean that occasionally you hit situations where I deliberately left out all of the keywords that relate to things. I'm trying to find something that I've never read before. I think there is sort of it's more googly rather than straight mathematically. Because Amazon's goal is to have the first thing on the list be something that you don't own yet that you're desperate to own as soon as you see it exists.
I mean, I think above all that, though, the title of a book influences things massively. I saw someone posted that there's an independent author out there who's titling all her books Thriller : then the name of the book. Thriller, the name of the book. So that before, people have been doing the name of the book, and then in the subtitle or the series title, they have a thriller adventure or something. And Amazon seems to have stopped checking those, and they're not relevant for searches anymore. So now people are getting even more desperate and putting Thriller : and then the name of the book. It's just, from what they were saying, though, we're back to reader expectations. Her reviews were atrocious. Like, it was, half a star filled in or something, because people were just, this is not what I was searching for. This is not what I was expecting. Which is again, to our topic, that it's about the quality of the writing, and you don't necessarily want certain people to read your book. Like for fantasy and sci-fi, that we write, or speculative fiction, I guess. Getting someone who likes James Bond style thrillers, and that's all they like, or all they like is military action, or whatever it happens to be, cowboys. That person would hate our books and go, there's a guy in work, and he said he watched Game of Thrones until he heard there were dragons, and then he said, screw this, there's no such thing as dragons. His favorite genre is science fiction. I pointed out that there's no such thing as, Luke Skywalker either, but, certain people, that's not their genre. They're not going to get over the suspension of disbelief for that genre no matter what. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting kind of way to look at things. As we say, like, I like Facebook advertising because then you see a long-term way to get a return on an investment, like I did with the bike collection. Work out an ad that gets people to go there, and actually there's more sales than there is advertising costs. And then as soon as that flips, just turn off the ads. But more and more, it's about the writing fitting what the person wants and being so good that they want more of it, I guess. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, I've seen both ways on this. My approach has always been to try and sell to people who are going to like the book. But I read an article about selling petrol actually this morning, because I came across it utterly coincidentally. Wasn't expecting it to be at all relevant to tonight's podcast, in which it was, the point was that you're nothing to do actually with selling petrol. It's all to do with the fact that the person had tried to buy petrol and they'd assumed petrol in the United States would be the way that petrol in the United States is portrayed in the media.
Yeah, it was Nick Stevenson's.
Yes, it was. Yeah, so it's Nick Stevenson's thing about petrol. So yeah, his leaving money on the table thing that you should be trying to sell to people who you don't think are going to be like you. So I think, and his point was that your marketing strategy shouldn't match how you are marketed to, or how you like to be marketed to, because other people wouldn't be. But I was thinking, sort of by extension from that, assuming that people who like Westerns won't like your book is missing out on, if you write a book that's about characters in hostile situations, if the thing that people like about Westerns is that frontier mentality, one man and his gun against a dangerous world filled with another culture, sci-fi and Westerns do intersect a lot. Similarly, Westerns and fantasy.
Well, there's the Stephen King series, isn't there?
The Gunslinger.
The Gunslinger. Yeah. I read the first. Is it in pieces? I forget, but I think, was it serialized or something? I think I recall I thought I read the first one, but I could be wrong. It was back in the 80s.
The first one is short. It's a novella, novelette, whatever you want to call it. And the later ones are chunking, big, epic fantasy size books. And it's a long, long series. I think 9-10 books, I think.
I mean, as I said, I haven't read it since the 80s, but that's, again, that's pretty close to cowboy stuff.
It's cowboy fantasy, yeah. It's something else it is. It's very different from everything else Stephen King does.
Well, didn't he? He wrote as Richard Bachman and wrote a bunch of sci-fi, though, didn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that up on Stephen King. I've just read that and Needful Things, which was atrocious. Yeah. I'm not really a Stephen King fan, but he has written under pseudonyms in different genres.
Yeah, The Gunslinger is my favorite of his work, probably, because it's something he was doing because he had this really big idea that he loved, rather than something he was doing because he enjoyed writing it and it sells. So there's a difference to The Gunslinger. It's got less of the things that are Stephen King's classic style. So it doesn't sell so well to people who love it and Needful Things and so on. But it's so that's
well, I mean, Nick Stevenson's point was that don't assume anything about your audience. So we've discussed writing a more serious science fiction book, and you mentioned, Dave, well, we've done a lot of silly stuff, so is that going to be against our audience? But we don't know that. We could do a reader survey, which we really should.
Yeah.
And find out, and they might say, yeah, tone is fine, vary the tone, but don't vary the genre. Or they might say, vary the genre is fine, but don't vary the tone. But we don't know at the moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to the topic. So how do we define good writing then? Is it a matter of, this week I was reading the Top 10 Sacred Cows of Publishing by Dean Wesley Smith. And his thought is you just write what you really want to write and you don't edit it and you just send it out or publish it, which I don't really agree with myself. But that's because I think, like he was saying, fix the spelling errors, but don't fix any story unless your editor tells you have to.
Well, there are two threads to good writing that I can think of. I mean, one of them is the technical aspect, that if you don't spell check, you don't grammar check, you don't do any of the proofing or technical editing, it's probably not going to come out as something easy to read. And second thread is the more emotive story side, that you want characters people can connect to. You want a story that holds together. So thinking about what so I think good writing isn't a single one thing that is good, or a single two things that are good you can write down as a series of rules. For me, it starts with, if you are going to deviate from standard spelling, standard grammar, use a particular dialect rather than the accepted dialect of your language, then you should do that consciously for a reason. You should say, I'm going to write without using commas or without using speech marks or whatever else a famous writer is famous for doing and is critically acclaimed for his work, but also doesn't use speech marks. You're doing it because it's your choice, and in the understanding that potentially you're going to lose readers. There are going to be readers who throw it across the room because they go, well, no speech marks, what crappy writing. And so everything else has to be spot on if you're going to make a deliberate deviation.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I presume you're talking about The Road, which I read. The unknown named author. Anyway, that his lack of speech marks annoyed me. But I read the whole thing, and the thing that annoyed me more was the fact that the story didn't go anywhere. Like, that was irritating.
I'm trying not to slate Cormac McCarthy too much. No, what I was actually I was actually avoiding my bringing back my vendetta with James Joyce.
Oh, okay. I haven't read any Joyce.
It's most of it is great. I've read Portrait of the Artist many times. Dubliners is interesting. Ulysses it's a little bit kooky, but the image is, so it works. That's why he deviates from the standards, but he does it in a way that it's almost poetic. And then you get Finnegan's Wake. And I've read the first page and a half of Finnegan's Wake 5 times. And that's as far as I get before I give up. That's the point where I can't force myself through it anymore because it just isn't working. And it also happens to be one of the most critically acclaimed books ever. That it's brilliant. But this is any sort of, is it good writing? Well, measured by critical acclaim, yes. Measured by readers who've finished the book. And I probably like literary fiction more than the average reader. And I certainly finish books more often than the average reader. I almost always finish a book. So for me to not finish a book means that probably there are a lot of people out there who wouldn't get that far and wouldn't have tried 5 times to try and get that far. So is that good writing because it's got lots of critical acclaim, or is it bad writing because readers won't read it?
I think I tend to veer on the side of you want as many people to enjoy a work of art as possible. You don't want something that is so difficult to get into that the regular person would not understand it. Now, at the same time, you can have works that are misunderstood in their own time because they're difficult to get into. That's a completely different thing.
But James Joyce is an example of how marketing and writing impact differently. Because I started reading James Joyce because my English master at school really liked him. So we had Portrait of the Artist as a set text. He read bits of the Dubliners to support Portrait of the Artist. And I liked it. So he lent Ulysses. And I liked that. And so because I'd liked Portrait of the Artist, Ulysses, and the Dubliners, I got Finnegan's Wake out of the library. And I couldn't get into it. And the reason I kept trying is because those first 3 books of his that I'd read, I'd really liked. So I had this feeling that I should like Finnegan's Wake. And whilst being, there is no pressure at all on me to read Finnegan's Wake. Nobody is trying to sell it to me. I can't remember ever seeing an advert for Finnegan's Wake. But the reason I kept reading it was until I finally made myself promise that I wouldn't try again. Was because I'd liked the previous books. So his good writing had got me to that point. But now if I saw another James Joyce, potentially if I even saw a James Joyce I'd enjoyed in the library, I probably wouldn't get it out because I've now got Finnegan's Wake stuck in my head. So I associate him with a book that I couldn't finish, which for me is significant. So it's sort of like I got into it because it was supposed to be great, which is word of mouth marketing. And I stuck with it because the writing spoke to me.
So if it was reversed, if that was the first one you'd read, would you have never have read any of them because you'd assumed they were all terrible? Or if you'd read that and then someone had said, but the rest of them are different?
It would depend on who was saying it. And this is why lots of authors will say that avid fans are like gold dust, because if your friend tells you, I think you'll really like this book, because you know each other well, your immediate assumption is if they think you're going to like the book, then they've probably got good reason. So if someone had told me Finnegan's Wake isn't like the others, it was an experimental piece, it's a little bit it's a little bit like a band deciding to do a concept album. So the Rolling Stones decided to do Wagner's Ring Cycle played on the theremin. Lots of people love the Rolling Stones, and so the Rolling Stones could probably, if they said, let's make Wagner's Ring Cycle played entirely on the theremin, someone would fund it because they're famous. But if that was the first thing you heard, you wouldn't think, oh, I didn't like that, and then for that reason not like Sympathy for the Devil or whatever. So if it's different enough, if someone tells you that's completely different and you've got reason to trust them, then you would. If that was the first thing I'd seen, if that was the first book of Joyce's I'd read, and then I'd seen a random stranger writing on the internet saying, just read Dubliners, it's great, it's not like Finnegan's Wake, that would probably cause me to think I'd enjoy Dubliners more than Finnegan's Wake, but it wouldn't get me over that hurdle of wanting to enjoy it enough to seek it out. And if it came to putting money down, then that hurdle would be even more significant. So,
but if a random stranger said Finnegan's Wake is absolute garbage and nothing like the rest of Joyce's stuff, you really have to read The Dubliners, it's the best book ever written. Like if they put it in that kind of extreme language with that.
If someone put it in that language, and then I might take it out from the library. So I'm saying it's sort of probably, and it would potentially, if someone raved enough about how it was different, then that would get me as far as a no risk read. So I'd get it from the library, or I'd borrow it from someone who I knew owned a copy. But it's tricky, because then you run into the problem that I suspect a proportion of other people who fit the stereotypical British personality don't like excessive expressions of emotion. So if someone says, this is the best book ever written, my immediate thought is, oh, that's a bit strong, isn't it? I mean, best book ever written. I'm not sure. I won't say anything because it's not polite and people are entitled to their opinion. But so it would have to be something that raved about the book without being excessive enough that it made me think, oh, I don't know. which kind of proves the point that sort of it's taking a lot of effort to come up with a situation in which, if I'd encountered Finnegan's Wake first, I'd then have read more Joyce anyway, which I think is the lesson that if you read books, you like them, you read the next one, and then you hit one you don't like, that tends to stop you where you are, but you don't lose your liking for the previous books.
Yeah.
If you hit a book you don't like, the amount of effort it will take from external forces to get you to read a new book by that author is quite high.
Which is back to, it's back to the theme, which is,
yes,
if you have a book that's completely out of left field, like whilst you were talking, I was thinking of the Beatles and Revolution 9, which is not obviously like, and it's even as a Beatles fan, I could not say I enjoy that song. But if you have a book that's like that, that's obviously more of a, like Revolution 9, you can just press skip. The book, if you read the whole thing, it's going to have been with you for a week or more. That it's probably best to put that under a pseudonym then. Even a declared pseudonym, which all the Stephen King ones now that are under Richard Bachman say Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman.
Yeah.
So if you said Dave Higgins writing as John Smith,
yes,
you then have the out of saying, yes, but that's a John Smith title. That's obviously not like all the other ones. Read my core ones here. They'll all be the same kind of thing. Which, again, we're back to reader expectations. Then you're setting up the reader expectations of, well, this is going to be weird because it's not the same pen name. Which, going back to Dean Wesley Smith, he mentioned that Christine Catherine Rush had 15 or something pen names he named in the book. Just like, geez, how would you keep up? If you have to put something out in all those different pen names and there's 15 of them, that's a lot of pen names.
Well, I suppose it depends on what you're using the pen names for. And I know some authors use pen names just to sort titles. So if they want, the clearest example is a guy who wrote the Culture series, Ian M. Banks. He released his sci-fi as Ian M. Banks. He released serious literary fiction as Ian Banks. And everyone can see it's the same guy. And he used pretty much identical author blurbs, author picture, and so on. But he was using them just so that on Amazon or anywhere else, if you click on author, it takes you to a listing of all the books. It just gets you all of the sci-fi ones in a grouping, and all of the literary ones in a grouping. So you can do that to give your readers the ability to go, well, I'd like another culture book, and not end up with The Wasp Factory. Because if you see the cover of The Wasp Factory, see the title The Wasp Factory, and compared to like fearsome engine, the use of weapons, state of the art, The Wasp Factory sounds like it could easily be another high concept space opera. So just having that pseudo pen name splits them out. So I think sort of if you've got 15 pen names, you wouldn't be releasing 15 books a year or whatever. Potentially some of those pen names will have existed to release a 3-volume romance series set in Regency England or whatever. And I don't know actually what Catherine Rush used them for, but if you're releasing a romance series set in Georgian England and then you're releasing sci-fi, I'll write the sci-fi series under this pen name, And then once I finish the sci-fi series, I'll never use that pen name again because I'll be writing historical fiction. So I want a different pen name for that. Potentially, you'd pick up one of the pen names again if you went, well, I think I'll write some more classic romance. But, well, she might be knocking out 15 books a year, one under each pen name. And if she is, then she's found a process that really works for her.
Yeah.
But
I've thought about this before. I missed a trick because my middle initial is F. So I could have released my science fiction under SF Cantan.
That would have been funny. I don't know.
I don't know. It would be a bit too hard.
The lawyer in me is immediately going, is that so obvious that people would assume that it was a trick? Are people going to look at that and go, no, that is too twee, I shall avoid it, for the writing will probably be similarly like that.
Yeah. But then, like, if I've written sci-fi and fantasy, the problem is I can't then be SF Cantan for thrillers or something, because then people will go, why is it SF? He writes the science fiction and it's SF. It must be science fiction. Anyway, that's beside the point. We've kind of reached our limit. I don't think we solved what is involved in good writing, other than, I'd say, writing a lot of stuff and finding your voice.
And for me, it's consciously deviating from you want. If you take speculative fiction has the potential to have anything happen, but the best speculative fiction has only a small change from standard reality or from things that most people know to be within the realms of possibility. So you have space flight because people know, well, space flight is possible. You have aliens that you just introduce an alien that's different in some way. And you take that change and you make the book about the consequences of that change. You don't have changes for the sake of it. You don't have, okay, instead of space flight, we're all going to travel in giant rubberized bubbles, and there are aliens who look like octopuses who can travel through solids, and this and that and this and that, because it's possible in an infinite universe that it exists. But the further away you get from what readers understand, the more effort readers have to put into trying to keep it all in their heads. So with your plot, essentially good writing involves the question, does this deviation need to be here? So if you are writing silly sci-fi, which we do, and some of our things are there to be wacky, but none of it is there just because we went, oh, well, we don't have to have gravity, so let's not have gravity. And we might go, well, what would happen if there weren't gravity? Okay, well, what would the consequences of that be? But the things that are there have consequences, which actually are involved in the story. And similarly with the rules of grammar, I have no objection to reading a book where someone has decided to throw out certain rules of punctuation. Large chunks of Fearsome Engine are not written in standard English, but it's for a reason, and everything else is polished and spot on. So you can see that it's actually, firstly, this is a deliberate deviation. So you don't get the expectation, oh, this author can't spell, they probably can't write. And also that there's going to be a reason for it. So there's some payoff in the extra effort in unraveling it. Which means that good writing works on the basis that the reader is actually going to be rewarded for the effort they put in. So you're going, well, why would someone read this? You're not writing because you can. You're writing because there's a purpose to it. It's achieving something. And however far you go from the norm, you're choosing for a reason. It might not be a reason that people agree with. It might be a reason that not everyone gets. It might lose you readers, but you're choosing to do something. So it's an active rather than whimsical process.
Yeah. I mean, they were talking on the To Be Read podcast about Midshipman's Hope. I don't know if you've read that book.
Is that Maturin?
It's David Feintuck wrote it. It's about there's these ships that are traveling between solar systems, and they take years to get there. So the crews on them are like a 17th century frigate, basically. There's like incredible discipline, and people are keel-hauled and hanged for the minor crimes and things like that. But it was on the To Be Read podcast, and that they were saying, I really enjoyed that series. I loved it. But two of them didn't like it. They didn't hate it, but they didn't like it because it was a milieu story and not a character story, which is what they would prefer.
I see what they mean, and it's the same as the hard sci-fi debate. Some sci-fi is very focused on the hows of things, the implications of things, and it was huge within the very narrow confines of the niche community discussion about Charlie Stross writing his list of things to avoid in space opera. And there were questions about, well, is this space opera? And there were things like, well, I won't assume the primary grain of a planet is ubiquitous, and that there won't be a food substance that is 40% of the productivity, and all of these things. And there were people going, well, how many readers actually generally care about the socio-geographic impacts of agronomy on terraforming a third stage world? How many people actually understand that sentence?
Yeah, I mean, if you, like, I don't know, making a snap judgment, like if Neil deGrasse Tyson or Stephen Hawking or someone who is really into that kind of stuff read that book, maybe they'd be thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I certainly wouldn't be. If there was a major gap in logic somewhere in the physics of things, I would not be going, hey, wait a second, that gravity doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it seems right in depth. But take sci-fi. At one end, you've got something like The Martian, where it's all fact-checked. And he did huge rewrites because someone pointed out, well, actually, hydroponics doesn't work quite like that. And at the other end, you've got Star Trek, where they teleport to planets. You'll arrive somewhere, and it's like, well, the entire planet is given over to the production of genetically modified wheat. And the major risk are these little flumpy, fuzzy things that eat constantly. And it's not. Star Trek is hugely popular, but the science of Star Trek is all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, it was meant as a more of a social statement than a scientific statement.
Exactly. It's not at all hard. And most sci-fi isn't hard enough for everyone, because lasers make noise. Space battles happen. And the debate over whether it is actually possible to have a space battle is still raging.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on that as well, that in our episode 6 or 7 of season 1 of Green Star.
1, episode 7, yeah. The episode that everyone went, yeah.
I don't like this.
I don't like, which is reader expectations, because we've done 6 episodes of silly sci-fi, and then we did a pastiche of hard sci-fi with the hardcore orbital mechanics of the same characters. And so as a character piece, the characters are the same, but it's not what the readers expect.
And if they'd bought a book where we'd said this is hard sci-fi and it had a hard sci-fi type of cover,
yeah,
it would have been fine.
Yeah, that episode on its I do occasionally wonder how that episode would do on its own.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to write something that hard sci-fi-ish at some stage.
Yeah.
I mean, we could put that on our 1,000 projects we have to write.
I have. Yeah.
Like, I do like the challenge of it, because so in the episode, I mean, a minor spoiler, but they have to then use actual physics to go, well, how would you try and disable a ship that's following you? What momentum would be taken into account, and the fact that they're going at this speed, well, they can't just stop. They have to turn around, reverse their engines, and then fire for the same amount of time in order to stop.
Yeah. Look, interestingly enough, thinking about it, in the first episode of Green Star actually does do some explaining of how the wacky stuff fits with the laws of physics. They discovered a way to overcome one of the big obstacles to interstellar travel. And, well, we dealt with the fact that spaceships should theoretically carry on moving in a straight line until acting upon, because we discovered this underlying matrix, and we've got a different kind of engine that can hold on to it. So we can do the crazy stuff, and that fits physics, because it's using physics that hasn't been discovered yet. And so I suppose, yeah, Green Star is hard sci-fi.
Yeah, certainly.
So I can't actually say that with a straight face.
Anyway, we're coming up to an hour,
so
we should probably stop there. Thank you all very much for watching. Next week, we'll be taking a break. So we'll be back the week after that, and we'll see you then.
Bye for now.